Disney Channel flow. Been 6 months, never done before. All the competition, man, PewDiePie is next, man. I'm pumping all these checks. This one.
I despise that chicken.
What is going on, guys? Now, last week I said that I was going to upload a video like this every single week on Wednesday, so here is my second week of just the movies that I watched throughout this week. Now, also last week I said that some weeks I might watch 2 or 3 movies, some weeks I might watch 5 or 6. Well, this week I watched 7 movies, so I averaged watching a movie every single day. In all reality, I watched 3 movies one day, 2 movies another, and none some other days. But these are the movies this week. I particularly like most of the movies that we're going to go through, so it was kind of hard to rank them. But feel free, if you had watched these movies, to leave your ranking down below. But let's get right into it. Now, coming in at our last place spot is Romeo and Juliet. Now, let me just say, I did not want to watch this movie this week. I actually watched it with my girlfriend on Wednesday, and it was kind of a bargain, so she would watch another movie on this list. But yeah, I watched it. It was the first time I've ever watched it. It's not very good. This is probably the worst movie I've watched in a long time. It's trying to do kid humor in all the worst ways. It goes for your cheap laughs, but then it's also trying to appeal to the adult audience. But it just makes really inappropriate jokes at times, and it really shocks me because there are some phenomenal actors in this movie. Patrick Stewart's in this movie, Emily Blunt's in this movie, my main James McAvoy is in this movie, and it just really disappoints me because I feel like all of these actors kind of did it just for the paycheck, because when you look at the pedigree that these actors and actresses have, it just really doesn't fit in. This movie was directed by the same person who directed Shrek 2, which is personally my favorite out of the Shrek series. So I really don't know exactly what went wrong with this movie. It just doesn't feel right. The animation looks cheap and all these other things. But they had everything to go for a pretty decent movie, but it doesn't look very good. It isn't voice acted very well. All these things just don't make for a good movie, surprisingly. So it comes in at our last place spot. So the movie that I was just mentioning that I had to bargain to watch is coincidentally our next place spot, and it is It Chapter 2. Now, the reason why I had to bargain to watch this movie is because it's kinda scary, and she really didn't enjoy the scary movie. So I watched this in the theaters, but I hadn't watched it since. I had got this Blu-ray for Christmas, and now I have just gotten to watch it for the first time. But this movie, while it does have its appeals to it, is most definitely flawed. It is definitely way worse than the first movie in the reboot. But it's just interesting to think about. So this movie, first of all, is way too long. This movie almost has a runtime of 3 hours long, and it still feels like it is missing something, even with that prolonged view time. And the main problem of why it has this view time issue and why I have an issue with this movie in general is the second act. I don't have a problem with the acting, the writing really, the characters, they're all pretty good. They still carry over from that first movie, but the second act is so long and it is so tedious and pointless because we pretty much just try and go with every single character that we have, which is about 6 or 7 by the way, and we just go as they try and find their totem. And it's pretty much just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. And it, becomes not very scary at a certain point because you realize it's coming. And then just the repetition of it makes this middle act super boring. And then the ending I also don't particularly like. We just get pretty much the Losers Club are about to lose to It or Pennywise the Clown. They're pretty much losing in this fight. And they realize, the way we can beat him is just calling him a clown. If I realized that all of my problems could have been solved by calling my people that I did not enjoy being around, calling them a clown, my problems would have been solved back in 2015. But they weren't. So I think that's kind of a dumb way to end this series because I doubt there will be a third one because Pennywise is supposedly dead. And this is where it ends in the book. But yeah, it's honestly a very disappointing film for me in 2019. But yeah, it's coming in at our next to last place spot. Now, coming in at our number 5 spot, I have Toy Story 4. Now, let me just start out by saying, as we move into the top 5, All of these movies are extremely good. Depending on what week I could have watched these movies, each one of these possibly could have came in at our number 2 or number 1 spot. But I watched a lot of really good movies this week. But with Toy Story 4, the reason why I have it at our number 5 spot is I just feel like it was missing something. I did not have the same sense of feeling, the same magic as I did watching the prior 3 films, and I don't exactly know why. I cannot put my finger on it. Now, I have only seen this film once. I did not see it in theaters. This was the first time I had watched this movie, but it's just coming out of the high note of the series in Toy Story 3, which is personally my favorite of the entire series, just to come to this where it just feels like this film is missing something, and I can't put my finger on it. I still really enjoyed this film. The film is definitely very good. I would recommend anyone watching it if you like the Toy Story series. But I would personally, if I was going to rank them, put this in my last place spot. I just feel like the side characters that we've grown up with in this series, Buzz Lightyear really doesn't have a lot of screen time. Like, he has some, but not a lot, where in the prior 3 films, he was pretty much our co-lead, and next to Woody, he had the most screen time. Jessie doesn't have, I swear, more than 5 lines in this entire movie. It's just these characters that we know and love have been reduced, and I don't particularly like that. I do like Forky, though, the new character that this movie introduced. I loved how he is just determined that he is trash, and it is really funny to watch some of the stuff. This movie is definitely pretty funny. But where I heard that this movie was really funny but also really sad, I didn't get that emotional connection to this movie. So that is why I have it at our number 5 spot. Our number 4 spot, though, is Timmy. Failure, mistakes were made. Now, those of you who are looking at this poster and was like, did you really just pick a Disney Plus only film to go over Toy Story 4? Heck yeah, I did. This is my list. Deal with it. And I guarantee you, if you think that, you most likely did not watch this movie, because this movie, while it might have a little bit of bad acting because they're child actors, like, you gotta give them a little bit of a break there, the writing in this movie and the emotion it makes you feel is next level. It just tells a story of a kid and the tactics he uses really just to calm himself down in school as he's entering into middle school, and just the ways he deals with this with his imaginary friend, which is a polar bear, and his detective agency is really touching. And this movie almost made me cry, and I do not cry in movies. I was pretty close though. But when I looked at the poster of this movie, I was worried because I thought, oh yeah, this is just another kids movie. They're going to use the polar bear pretty much just to make cheap jokes. But it did not do that whatsoever. They only used the polar bear when they really needed to, and it is one of the most touching scenes in this movie because they did not rely on just the animal for laughs. This movie is funny. This movie is touching. I would definitely recommend, if you have Disney Plus, giving this movie a chance because it is super good, and this is why I have it at my number 4 spot. And honestly, if I had not watched some of the other movies this week, it honestly could have been my number 1 spot because I really enjoyed this movie. I was debating putting it at 5 at a point. I was debating putting it at 3 at a point. It is a super good movie. Give this movie a chance. I don't want to talk too much about it because it just came out in January, but give this movie a chance. That's all I gotta say. Moving into our top 3, though, I have Knives Out. Now, if this would have been the first time I watched this movie, I probably would have had it lower on the list. But the second time I watched this movie, I really enjoyed it. This is another movie I really wasn't planning on watching this week. I had some family come down, and they really wanted to watch this movie, so I watched it. And watching it a second time, it really grew on me. This is one of those films or it's supposed to be really twisty, but once you actually know the twist, I like picking up on the tiny details that lead to the twist just the second time I've watched it and just picking up on those things. But when I originally watched this movie, I didn't like how they pretty much gave away who did the crime in the middle of the movie and then just kind of progressed and just to twist it at the very end. As I thought this movie was almost going to be like a remake of the 80s movie Clue, and it's really not like that at all. It's kind of more of a satirical crime drama at times, but I really did enjoy this movie. The acting in this movie is phenomenal. Chris Evans does a remarkable job. Daniel Craig is hilarious. But yeah, I have this movie moving into our top 3 spot because it is at number 3. Just missing out at our number 1 spot, though, I have A Quiet Place. Now, some of you may be sitting here, how do I rank this movie this high? And I honestly probably would have been in the same boat earlier this week as well. But getting to watch this movie again, probably since the first time that I watched it in theaters, this movie is almost like a form of art. Just the way that it builds tension and communication almost with no words said in the entire film. When I was watching this movie, I was actually really interested because I was watching it on my streaming app on my phone, and I was pretty much trying to figure out when the first words were going to be spoken. And if you don't count like little whispers here with sign language, the first real words in this movie are not spoken until 38 minutes in. And that is the time where you need to build your characters up. But you still feel for these characters. You still care for these characters if something is going to happen. And this movie, I'm just realizing now that this movie is kind of my horror movie / kids movie week. It's a completely different contrast of movies. But this movie also does horror right. And I wouldn't say this movie is a particular scary movie, but it builds tension perfectly. And everything that It Too does wrong, but I would say the original one did right, where it just builds tension, this movie kind of has that same feel, where it's not relying on jump scares for its horror element. It relies on tension, and you know when the scares are coming, but that build up in tension makes your heart pound, and it keeps you at the edge of your seat because you care for these characters and you don't want anything bad to happen to them. And just realizing that too, that this movie is John Krasinski's directorial debut for film, just that guy from The Office who pretty much is just a funny guy, makes this movie as serious as this. And it pretty much, he said in an interview that it was a love letter to his kids, and you can see that because it's just pretty much telling a story of how a father and a mother cares for their kids when the world is just going to chaos and they have these alien creatures invading their world. And it sounds silly saying it, but man, this movie is good. Have it at our number 2 spot. Now, coming in at our number 1 spot, it has to be Aladdin. Now, this is really the first time I think I've watched the original Aladdin in a pretty long time. But rewatching this might be a weird way to say it, but I feel like this is Disney at its most meta. And what I really mean by that is this movie just feels the most Disney. And just with me saying that, now The Lion King, which is the movie I think that comes after this in the Disney Renaissance era, is my favorite movie of all time. But I would say Aladdin is more Disney than The Lion King, because you have your princess, you have Aladdin who just erupts into songs at random times. But I like the theme of this movie a lot because it just means the story it's trying to tell shows that despite where you come from or where you've been, what really matters is your heart and your kindness. Because Aladdin, they call him a street rat in this movie because he's poor and he steals for food, but he still has a good heart. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what wins him the princess. You have Robin Williams in this movie who kills it in this role. The genie is a role that was made for Robin Williams to play. And in the new version, I don't feel like Will Smith disgraced this role. I actually like the role that Will Smith played. But Robin Williams, man, is just on a different level with this role. And it really just makes me realize, I still like the new one, but it makes me realize how much this movie is better than the new one. Because again, I hadn't watched it in a really long time. But yeah, this movie is great, and I had to put it at my number 1 spot. So that's going to be it for this one, y'all. Again, if you have seen any of these movies, feel free to leave your list in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with another video like this next Wednesday.